Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 59 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
Well, Lenny, I can't wait to hear what you think about our book this month, The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. And I know you just got back from the shore. Did you read this book while you were at the shore?
Oh, no. Nancy, you have me reading all these books. This is not a beach book, I don't think.
No.
This was rather dark.
I was hoping you did not take it as a beach read because it's a little dark for a beach read.
My goodness. I end up with the craziest books and movies at the beach. Do you know, we were going to have a rainy day and we were thinking of going to the theaters, and Eric wanted me to watch that child trafficking movie. I'm like, I don't want to watch. I can't do this. So no.
How about the Barbie movie? That would have been a good shore movie.
That's what I'm talking about. Vacation. Some pink. Yeah. So no, I did not. Thank goodness I didn't.
Yeah, that's good.
I read my favorite genre, which is Christian fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Little Hallmark kind of love stories.
Nice.
None of this dark domestic violence, murder, and mayhem stuff. Okay, well, this book, before we get ahead of ourselves, The Marriage Portrait. The author is Maggie O'Farrell, and she has written numerous award-winning books. The Marriage Portrait is her most recent and the only one of her books that I've read. Her most recent book prior to that was Hamnet, which was a Sunday Times bestseller and the winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. And I think you read this Hamnet because I think I even heard of that.
Yes, it was a huge book when it came out. It was also historical fiction that told the story of William and Anne Shakespeare's lives, focusing on the death of their son, Hamnet. So also not a beach read, I would say.
No, not as Shakespeare stuff as a beach read.
No. But I really liked Hamnet quite a bit. It was incredibly evocative. It felt like you were totally steeped in the time period and the place. So that's why I thought we might enjoy The Marriage Portrait. And The Marriage Portrait is also historical fiction. This one is set in 16th century Italy. We meet Lucrezia, the youngest daughter of the Grand Duke of Tuscany, and his wife. Lucrezia is a troublesome child. She's wild at heart, but she also has great talents. She's a talented artist, for example. When her older sister, who is engaged to Alfonso, Duke of Ferrara, dies, Lucrezia's parents pledge her to the Duke as soon as she's old enough to marry him. And the book bounces around in chronology. So in the first chapter of the book, Lucrezia and Alfonso have been married for a year, and she realizes he plans to kill her because she has not conceived a child.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay, now we're going back to the 16th century Italy. So I know that women didn't have a lot and that there was a lot of marrying off of people.
Yeah.
But this young lady was young.
Yes.
She was like 12, 13 years old.
Well, in real life she was, but in this book she was 16 when she marries Alfonso.
Okay, but she was
betrothed to him when she was 13 or 14, I guess.
Yeah, she was pretty young.
Yeah.
And she got her sister's hand-me-downs, which that didn't that wasn't sitting too well with me, to be quite honest. She is really in the dark.
Yeah.
She's like living in the nursery.
Yeah.
She's not even out in the house. She doesn't know anything except for what the nanny tells her.
Mm-hmm.
So she is coming into marriage knowing very little about the world.
Yes.
And she is trying to navigate all of this and what it means to be a wife with her only knowledge base being that of watching her mother and her father, and she doesn't have that much experience watching them.
No, because her mother doesn't really like her very much. She thinks she's too wild. She banished her to the kitchen when she was a baby, and she wasn't even around her mom as a baby or toddler. And then even as a young girl, she doesn't really spend that much time with her mother. And her father's very busy being the Grand Duke of Tuscany. And she draws conclusions about what marriage is based on very little information, just watching them occasionally. But they do seem to have a very happy marriage. The good news is what she sees is what a happy marriage is for that time.
Right, right. So that at least she has a good role model going into this
Yeah.
somewhat. Ay, ay, ay.
I loved Lucrezia. I
Okay.
thought that Maggie O'Farrell did a magnificent job making her a very sympathetic character who we are rooting for really from the beginning of the book. And part of it is because she is such an innocent.
Mhm.
We just don't want her to be taken advantage of. And we also see that she has been an underdog her whole life. And so it's
Yes.
the classic rooting for the underdog. Her brothers and sisters completely disregard her. As a girl, she has, of course, less status than her brothers do, but she's also the youngest girl. And again, was kind of a wild child that everyone disregards. And they think that she has no positive characteristics. At one point, Lucrezia is talking to Alfonso, and he asks about how many times she's had her portrait painted because apparently that is something that would be very typical among the ruling families. And she says, well, maybe once. And he said, well, what about your brothers and sisters? Well, they got their portraits painted all the time.
Why? She is definitely the underdog. That's a funny thing because you always hear parents say, their firstborn, they have a ton of baby pictures on the firstborn.
Right.
The secondborn, well, okay, there's baby pictures of the secondborn, but the firstborn is always a part of it. By the
Yeah.
time the third one or the fourth or the fifth one
Yep.
comes along, it's kind of like baby pictures. Do we have any pictures of the baby?
Well,
So
that would be me, Lenny. I was the youngest.
we do have some really nice pictures of you.
Not many.
No, we do. We do. As expensive as photos were back then, you kind of throw all the kids together and take a snapshot.
Yeah, well, I think they were a lot less expensive than getting a portrait painted.
Okay. We weren't the ruling family in Italy, that's for daggone sure. But anyway, yeah, I think we do have our heart. Like, we want this girl to be successful. We do feel like she's going into marriage with not a lot, and we are cheering her on. I like the fact that she excels in art,
Yes.
and I really liked the nanny because she saw the potential. She saw the child. She wanted to protect her.
Yes.
I think that she did like Lucrezia and she wanted to give her a fair shake.
Mhm.
That I liked about her. I liked that there was, I'm going into this marriage with hopes
Yes.
and being open to the possibilities, and I'll figure things out when I get there. And so she had some kind of confidence about herself
Mhm.
going into that.
Yeah, she was also a great observer of people.
Mhm.
Again, being the disregarded youngest daughter, she was an observer of people, watched people, was able to draw conclusions about people that served her well.
Yeah, that was one thing that she learned early on is how to navigate all these personalities and the
Mhm.
people, and introverted in some ways. Like, she spent a lot of time with inside of herself
Mhm.
trying to figure things out and navigate. So, interesting personality that the author created here
Mhm.
to set the stage to what the book then finally really explores with this coming out. Now I'm married and I've got to figure out how to be a wife and my role.
Yeah, and what to do if my husband's actually trying to kill me.
Yeah, because there for a while, we didn't know if he was or not.
Right, because she's not a completely reliable narrator. At least we don't
Right.
know if she is. There are times in the book, and again, the chronology skips around. So there are times in the book when she's growing up, when she's getting ready to go off with Alfonso, that her mother says things like she's over imaginative or she's too emotional. So we think, well, okay, in chapter 1, she says Alfonso's trying to kill her, but maybe she is just constructing this fantasy. Like in her drawings, she's a very fanciful, imaginative person. Maybe she is constructing this idea, but it is not reflective of reality because at first, Alfonso seems like a very charming person. He first notices her. She's a little girl, pretty drab, kind of always shuffled off to the corner. And he is walking around with her older sister, who he's betrothed to, and he notices her and he gives her some attention that surprises her. And then when they become betrothed, he even remembers that meeting and he seems like he is very sensitive and he sends her gifts that seem like he understands who she is. And we start thinking that she's pretty fortunate to be paired up with this guy. Then maybe we find out later that's not so much the truth. But what did you think of Alfonso at first?
I liked him at first, and again, I was reading the book thinking, is she just fanciful about how she is taking him? Because all the messages that he gave her originally were very, very positive,
Yeah.
but it doesn't take long to see some cracks.
Yeah. So when did you start seeing
Okay.
cracks?
So my first crack was when he forces himself on her.
Oh, well, yes, that would be a big crack because he says, "Don't worry, I am not going to force myself on you. I would never hurt you." Well, that lasts for one night. Night 2, he decides he's waited long enough. Yeah,
Yeah, that's the first crack.
that's a chasm right there, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought this book was interesting because it plays with this idea of initial impressions and then takes us to a very dark place. So I was wondering, did it spur any memories for you of a time that your initial impression of someone ended up being woefully wrong?
Oh.
You don't have to name names.
Oh, Nance, I nothing is really coming to mind. I think people are interesting,
Mhm.
and I do like that people change and surprise me and develop. I don't know that I have too many first impressions of people, maybe just as part of my personality. You meet somebody and you take in a lot of sensory stuff about them.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure them out. You're trying to think about connecting with them and what to talk about and things like that. Nothing really stands out to me, but it's an interesting question. So I was wondering if you have an answer to that.
It's an interesting question, but it doesn't mean I have a very good answer to it. I'll tell you what, I think that I'm a pretty good judge of people, and I probably am more quick to draw conclusions about people than you are, I think. I think when I meet someone, I'm taking in a lot of information, but I'm taking in information to figure out who they are. But I think I'm pretty good at it. I have pretty good intuition. And what I would offer up as evidence of that is when I was doing a lot of hiring of people, I was rarely surprised by who someone ended up being after we had hired them.
Oh my goodness, that's great, Nance.
I don't know that it's great because it does mean I'm kind of judgy.
Mm,
When I'm meeting people, I'm trying to figure out, okay, where are the strengths? Where are the weaknesses? Can I
mm,
trust this? What are they trying to convey? Is it true?
okay.
Is it false? Where I think you just are very open to people and just meet them where they are and are drawing fewer conclusions than I
Yeah.
am.
Very interesting to even think through that.
Mhm.
Huh.
So Alfonso does end up being terrible, not just to Lucrezia, but to his sisters and mother as well. He's a tyrant. We understand the depths of his depravity when he has his sister's lover strangled in front of her.
Yeah, that's another big crack, isn't it? Okay. Here's the second thing, like that little boy that gets beat up by his henchmen.
Yes.
To me, when she stood up in the carriage and she said, "Stop," and she knew that it was wrong, and he said, "You're not correcting anybody.
Yeah.
You're out of line." That was a big problem for me.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of big, a lot of
Okay.
big problems with Alfonso for sure.
Yeah. Here you go. You've got a guy who has all of this power, and we've talked about power
Yeah.
and how it can corrupt people. And if it goes unchecked, it typically isn't a very good situation. And Alfonso has it.
Yeah.
Then he becomes abusive. And Lucrezia has to figure out what she's going to do about it.
And there's really not much she can do because she's as powerless, certainly, as mom and sisters. He continually puts her in her place and really can do all kinds of things to her, have her locked up, make her cut her hair. I mean, he has complete power and authority over what her life will look like.
And in typical domestic violence situations, they remove and isolate the person.
Mhm.
And you get a feeling like she's pretty removed from her family. They have to cross mountains to get from her region to his region. And she writes to her parents, and they're like, "Get over it, girl. You got a good situation going on." So they're not going to be supportive.
She was raised to believe that she is totally subservient to her husband. To be a good wife is to be quiet,
Pregnant.
pregnant, yes, supportive,
Right.
never cross him, that she is his possession and her sole purpose in life is to obey him.
Right.
So I was interested in Lucrezia, the real life Duchess, and I did a bit of research. As I mentioned, she was 13 in real life when she wed Alfonso, and he was 24 at the time. She did die less than a year into their marriage, reportedly after a month of fever, severe weight loss, constant coughing, and a permanently bleeding nose. And modern historians have said that this was probably pulmonary tuberculosis. After Lucrezia's death, however, the rumors started that the Duke had poisoned her. And so I think that this is partially probably what inspired our author to write this story. There is a portrait of Lucrezia that survives, and that is the painting that is on the cover of this book. That actually is
Oh,
Lucrezia. Yeah, there are several other paintings and profiles, coins of her profile that survive as well. Alfonso marries twice after Lucrezia's death, but he never had any children. And in the book, even, we are led to believe that it is actually Alfonso who is the barrier to them conceiving a child. Lucrezia learns that he's been with a lot of women and none of them have ever become pregnant.
it's nice to make the women the scapegoat.
Mhm.
Chapter one, Nance, when it says she's going to be dead within the year, I knew that wasn't going to be my beach read from that point on.
Yeah.
And it did take me back to, okay, this is going to be a horrible story. What's going to happen to this poor girl? And my heart goes out to her immediately. But I will say that even though that haunting start to the book, it didn't change my interest in her story at all. I still was rooting for her. I still wanted her to have a good life. And because the author is very clever in making Alfonso seem like a nice young man at the
Mhm.
beginning, you're not really sure what's going to happen.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts on why would the author say that at the beginning, Nance?
It certainly sets up tension and a ticking clock, which are really important to create a page turner. But it made me a little sad because I did know the real life Lucrezia dies. I found the book hard going at first, knowing that and thinking this is going to be a very sad book about a husband killing a wife. I don't know if I can read this book knowing that this is what happens. So I had to switch to an Audible book, which I do occasionally because I felt like I would be able to listen to the book while I was doing other things. But of course, big spoiler alert, turns out not so much the story of the demise of Lucrezia. It wasn't until the doctor instructed Lucrezia to cut her hair, he believed would improve her chances of becoming pregnant. Because, I mean, we all know that long hair prevents a woman from becoming pregnant.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So, when 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 they cut her hair, that's when I got the inkling that this was gonna be a little different than what we believe is the actual story of what happened to Lucrezia.
Really? And the cutting of the hair.
Yeah, yeah.
I did not pick up on that at all.
When did you start getting an inkling that Lucrezia was not gonna be killed at the hands of her husband?
When that dashing okay, maybe not dashing.
Mute.
When the painter says, "Are you safe?" and "Meet me out back. I'll get you out of here," basically.
Mhm.
That's when I was hoping that she would be able to do it. But she was pretty sick and I wasn't quite sure.
And she said, I think rightly so, that Alfonso would never let her escape. And it would be impossible anyway, because the castle that she lived in was guarded around the clock. It was impregnable. She could not leave without being noticed.
Right.
So she dismissed his plans as being foolhardy.
But she did it.
Yeah. So it was that plan that you were like, aha, there is a plan a brewing.
She has found favor with someone. Someone is smart enough to know this girl is sick. She might be poisoned by her husband. And I'm going to put myself out there. I mean, really, it was his life too. He could have been killed easily. You kind of get the impression that everyone knew that her husband was a pretty bad guy
Yeah.
and reigned the region in terror.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a far stretch to know that maybe she was not being taken care of very well.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody does die, and that is a tragedy.
Also, another very sympathetic character.
Yeah.
She helps Lucrezia a lot. She supports her,
Mm-hmm.
and she ends up being the accidental murder victim.
Yeah, she kind of an advisor to her. She has more worldly sense, I think.
And she has the benefit of the gossip in the castle because she's interacting with the other servants and she is able to provide Lucrezia with a lot of information.
Right. So it ended up being a total stranger that was really the person who rescues her.
And she had rescued him as well. He had been close to death, lying on the floor of the palace, and her quick thinking brings him back to life after probably like a epileptic
Yeah, like some kind of seizure.
episode or a diabetic situation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in my mind, the two live happily ever after
Absolutely.
somewhere.
Yeah, far away.
Oy, oy, oy.
Overall, did you like the book?
Well, I'm glad I didn't read it at the beach.
Yes.
I did like the book because it is sort of based in history, so it helped me to understand a culture that and a place and a time that I was not familiar with. I agree with you. I think that it was a page turner. It was a pretty quick read for me. Really, once I
Mhm.
got started, it was like, I can't put this down. Like I think I read it in a weekend or 4 days or something.
Wow.
It was hard for me to put that book down. I really cared a lot for the character there, and I'm glad that she did survive it. What did you think, Nance?
I ended up really liking the book. I also liked living in a time period I haven't read a lot of books about, and learning about these people, even though it is historical fiction. So obviously, there's a lot of authorial creativity here. But for me, it leads me to do research about the time period and the people. And I think that that's fun as well.
Mm-hmm.
And her style of writing really does completely immerse you into the worlds of her characters. I think she does a really beautiful job writing descriptively about what is going on in her characters' lives and around her characters. She writes very evocatively. You feel like you're there with the characters, and I enjoy that.
Yeah, I liked that Lucrezia. It seemed like she was in a fog for me in some ways because she was so out of her element and so naive and so, yeah, she was very observant. She was trying to figure things out and was observant, but she was so sheltered
Mhm.
by so much that you really, when you were listening to her comments and trying to understand where she was getting her information and how she was interpreting the information, you really weren't sure if you were really getting what's really going on.
Yeah, it's a very limited point of view, and it almost is a feeling of claustrophobia, I would say,
Hmm.
because we are in her head, and that is really the only access we have to understanding what's going on around her.
That's a good word. I didn't do any research on this Italian family. I don't even know when I started reading it if it was a historical fiction or if any of this was made up or what. So I'm really excited about our next episode because when we were talking about what expert we wanted, we both agreed we need somebody who understands this time period so that we get more insight into Lucrezia and what her experiences were. And baby cakes, you found her.
I found her.
We're going to get our expert.
So, our next episode, we will have Dr. Deanna Shimmick join us on the front porch. She is a professor of European languages and studies at the University of California, Irvine. Her research interests are Italian literature, Italian and European history, women and gender studies, Renaissance, and early modern studies, among other areas.
So she's just going to be perfect. I'm really excited to talk to her about the role of the women during the Renaissance, her take on Lucrezia, and Alfonso.
She is going to be so interesting to talk to help set the stage about what was going on during this time period. Thanks for listening. And listeners, if you know someone who likes to read and likes to talk about books, tell them about our podcast. We would love to have more listeners. Our website is frontporchbookclub.com.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesdays of every month.
See you next time, Lenny.
All right. Take care, Nance.